The throne room stretched endlessly into darkness, its obsidian walls reflecting the dying light of conquered stars. Emperor Zarthok sat motionless on his crystalline throne, his 4 arms resting on armrests carved from the bones of dead civilizations. His 6 eyes, each larger than a planet, gazed into the void, where moments ago the last human colony had burned. 5,731 children. The number echoed in his consciousness like ripples across still water. Not warriors. Not soldiers. Children who had hidden in the underground shelters of New Eden while their parents fought his legions above. His Void Reapers had found them anyway, as they always did. The shelters had crumbled like paper beneath his army's might. Zarthok had watched through the eyes of his generals as the small bodies were pulled from the rubble. Some still clutched toys made from scraps of metal and cloth. Others held hands with siblings who would never wake again. The Emperor had felt nothing. Why should he? In his 10,000 years of conquest, he had exterminated entire species without a second thought. The humans were merely the latest in an endless line of inferior races that dared exist in his galaxy. The silence in the throne room was absolute. Even the ever-present hum of the dark matter engines that powered his world ship had fallen quiet, as if the universe itself held its breath. His advisors and generals stood frozen along the walls, their forms twisted into shapes that defied biology, each one a monument to his power to reshape life itself. Commander Velnash stepped forward, his metallic wings folding against his back. The human resistance has been completely eliminated, Divine One. Every colony, every ship, every outpost. The species known as humanity exists no more. Zarthok's primary eyes swiveled to focus on his commander, while his secondary eyes continued to stare into the darkness. And the child warriors they spoke of? The ones who supposedly held the power to challenge gods? Dead, Divine One. We found them in the deepest bunker. They were singing. Velnash's voice carried an odd note, something between confusion and unease. Even as our plasma cannons charged, they sang. Some held instruments made from salvaged materials. They died making music. The Emperor's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Music. How quaint. Did they believe their primitive sound waves would shield them from annihilation? Unknown, Divine One. But Velnash hesitated. An action that would normally result in immediate disintegration. But Zarthok was feeling generous in his victory. The commander continued. The song was unlike anything in our databases. Our xenopsychologists cannot explain why they would waste their final moments on such an action. Zarthok rose from his throne, his massive form casting shadows that seemed to swallow light itself. Each step he took caused reality to ripple, the laws of physics bending to accommodate his presence. He moved to the vast viewing portal that showed the empty space where Earth had once orbited its yellow sun. The humans' homeworld had been the first to fall, reduced to asteroids in the opening days of the war. "Show me," he commanded. Velnash activated a holographic display. The scene materialized in the air between them with crystal clarity. The bunker's interior, lit by failing emergency lights. Children of various ages huddled together. Some barely old enough to walk, others on the cusp of adolescence, and they were indeed singing, their voices joining in harmony despite the terror that must have gripped them. The song had no words, just notes that rose and fell like waves. Some children played makeshift instruments, drums made from supply containers, stringed instruments fashioned from wire and metal frames. A girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old stood in the center, conducting with a broken antenna, her face streaked with tears but her expression fierce with concentration. The plasma cannons began their charge cycle. The children had to know what was coming. The whine of building energy was unmistakable. Yet the song continued, growing louder, more defiant. The conductor girl raised her antenna higher, and the music swelled. Then came the flash of superheated plasma, and the recording ended. Zarthok studied the frozen final frame. Primitive species often display irrational behavior when faced with extinction. It means nothing. Yet something nagged at him. A sensation he hadn't experienced in millennia. He had conquered species that begged, that bargained, that raged against their fate. He had seen civilizations try to flee to other dimensions, seen them attempt to upload their consciousness to machines, seen them choose mass suicide rather than subjugation, but he had never seen children conduct a symphony while staring death in the face. Divine One, another advisor, Morgoth, stepped forward. We have completed analysis of the human neural patterns during their final moments. Would you like to review the data? Zarthak waved a dismissive hand. What could the thoughts of dead primitives possibly reveal? They were unusual, Divine One. Unlike any species we've encountered. Despite himself, Zarthak found his curiosity piqued. Display the data. Zarthak found Izar. Zarthak found Izar. The hologram shifted, showing brain scans and neural activity patterns. Morgoth began to explain, his voice taking on the clinical tone of a scientist. Most species experience predictable patterns when facing extinction. Fear, anger, despair. The humans showed these too. But there was something else. Something our xenopsychologists are calling defiant hope. Hope? Zarthak's voice carried a note of disdain. Hope for what? Rescue? Mercy? They should have known better. No, Divine One, not hope for survival, hope for... Morgoth paused, struggling to find words. Hope for meaning. Hope that their deaths would matter. Hope that somewhere, somehow, their song would be heard. The Emperor's laughter shook the throne room, a sound like grinding planets. Heard by whom? Their gods? We detected no divine presence. Their allies? They had none left. Their descendants? We ensured there would be none. Unknown, Divine One. But the pattern was consistent across all human subjects. Even the youngest children showed it. It appears to be hard-coded into their species at a genetic level. Zarthak turned away from the display, his massive form moving back toward his throne. It matters not. Hope is the delusion of the weak. They are dead, and their hope died with them. As he settled back onto his throne, a strange sensation washed over him. The throne room suddenly felt colder, though the temperature hadn't changed. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence more oppressive. He had won. Humanity was extinct. Another species added to his collection of conquered races. So why did victory taste like ashes? Divine One, Velnash ventured. Shall we proceed to the next target? The Aurelius Confederacy has been showing signs of resistance. Before Zarthak could respond, something happened that had never occurred in the 10,000 years of his reign. The lights flickered. Not just in the throne room, but throughout the entire worldship. For a fraction of a second, darkness claimed everything. When the lights returned, his advisors were looking around in confusion and fear. Power fluctuations were impossible on the worldship. Its dark matter cores were infallible, its systems protected by technologies that bordered on magic. What was that? Zarthak demanded, all 6 eyes blazing with fury. Unknown, Divine One. Velnash replied, his voice shaking. All systems show normal. There's no explanation for... Every day, the lights flickered again. This time, in that moment of darkness, Zarthak could have sworn he heard something, a single note, hanging in the air like a ghost. The same note the human children had been singing when they died. Scan everything, he roared. Find the source of this malfunction. His advisors scattered, their forms blurring as they moved at speeds that defied physics. Zarthak remained on his throne, his claws digging into the armrests. He was the cosmic emperor, the devourer of worlds, the end of all things. He did not feel fear. He could not feel fear. But as the lights flickered a third time and the ghostly note sounded again, closer now, something cold settled in where his heart should have been. The humans were dead. He had watched them die, every last one. So why could he still hear their song? The throne room plunged into darkness once more, and this time the lights did not immediately return. In that absolute blackness, Zarthak heard it clearly. Not just a note, but a voice, young, clear, and impossibly alive. A single word that would change everything. A word that should not exist, spoken by a voice that could not be. The word hung in the darkness like a judgment, like a promise, like the first note of a song that would never end. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Cosmic Emperor felt something he had thought burned out of him eons ago. He felt doubt. The word echoed through the darkness of the throne room, spoken in a child's voice that carried impossible weight. Remember. Zarthak's 6 eyes blazed to life, cutting through the darkness with beams of crimson light. His advisors cowered against the walls as his fury manifested as waves of psychic force. "Find the source," he roared. "Someone dares play games with me?" But even as his servants scrambled to obey, the Emperor knew this was no trick, no technological malfunction. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere. From inside his own consciousness, and from the furthest reaches of space. It was the voice of the conductor girl, the 7-year-old child who had led that final symphony in the bunker. The lights flickered back to life, revealing his throne room unchanged. Yet everything felt different. The air itself seemed to vibrate with an energy he couldn't identify. His advisors were frantically checking instruments, running diagnostics, searching for intruders that didn't exist. Divine One, Morgoth, approached cautiously, his form trembling. "We've detected an anomaly. It's impossible. But we're reading energy signatures from the destroyed human colonies, faint but growing stronger." Zarthak rose from his throne, reality bending around his massive form. "That's impossible. I watched those worlds burn. Nothing could survive the antimatter bombardment." "Yes, Divine One. The worlds are indeed destroyed. But the energy, it's not coming from the planets. It's coming from the space where they used to be. And it matches the harmonic frequency of the human children's song." The Emperor strode to the viewing portal, his claws leaving gouges in the floor that immediately sealed themselves. Outside, in the vast emptiness where human colonies had once orbited their stars, he could see it, faint at first, almost invisible, but growing brighter with each passing moment. Threads of light, weaving together in patterns that hurt to look at directly. "What is that?" he demanded. Velnash consulted his instruments, his metallic wings twitching nervously. "Unknown. Divine One. It appears to be some kind of resonance. The fabric of space-time itself is vibrating at the frequency of their music. But that's impossible. Sound cannot travel through vacuum, and even if it could, the humans possessed no technology capable of." "Remember." The voice came again, louder this time. Not just the girl's voice now, but a chorus. Hundreds of children's voices, speaking in perfect unison. The word reverberated through the world ship, causing displays to flicker and systems to momentarily glitch. Zarthak spun around, all 6 eyes searching for the source. "Show yourself," he commanded the empty air. "Face me, whatever you are." The lights dimmed, and in the shadows between reality, shapes began to form. Translucent, ethereal, impossible. The children from the bunker stood before him, their forms made of starlight and song. The conductor girl stood at their head, her antenna still raised, her eyes burning with something that transcended death. "You're not real," Zarthak stated, though for the first time in millennia, uncertainty crept into his voice. "The dead do not return. I have killed billions, and none have ever." "You never killed children before," the girl said, her voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't exist. "You killed warriors, soldiers, adults who chose to fight. But we didn't choose. We were just learning to sing." The Emperor's mandibles clicked in agitation. "Your species chose war when they refused my sovereignty. Your deaths are on their heads, not mine. Remember," the children said again. And this time the word hit Zarthak like a physical blow. Images flooded his mind, memories he had buried beneath eons of conquest. He saw himself as he had been, before the transformations, before the ascension to godhood. A young being on a world whose name he had forgotten, watching his own children play in fields of crystal grass. He saw their faces, heard their laughter, felt their small hands in his as they asked him to tell them stories of the stars. "No," he snarled, shaking his massive head to dispel the visions. That life is dead. I transcended such weakness. Did you? The conductor girl asked, stepping forward. Her form flickered between solid and ethereal, between dead and impossibly alive. When they came for your world, when they killed your children, what did you become to stop the pain? More memories crashed through his defenses. The day the devourers had come to his world, the moment he had found his children's bodies among the ruins, the oath he had sworn on their ashes, that he would become stronger than any force in the universe, that he would never be weak again, that he would never again feel the pain of loss. I became power itself, Xarthok growled. I became what was necessary. Adistazai. 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 You became them, the girl said simply. You became the thing that killed your children. And then you forgot they ever existed. Because remembering hurt too much. The throne room was spinning now. Or perhaps it was Zarthok who was spinning. His advisors had pressed themselves against the walls, terrified by the supernatural display. The ghostly children began to sing again, their voices weaving together in harmonies that penetrated the deepest layers of his consciousness. But this wasn't the song from the bunker. This was older, much older. It was a lullaby, sung in a language that had been dead for 10,000 years. His language. The song he had sung to his own children on nights when the stars seemed too far away and the darkness too close. Stop, he commanded, but his voice cracked. You have no right. We have every right. The conductor girl interrupted. We died as your children once died. Afraid. Innocent. Calling for parents who couldn't save us. But there's a difference. We didn't forget how to hope. We didn't forget how to love. We died singing because we remembered what you forgot. That some things are worth more than power. End quote. The ghostly forms were growing brighter now, their light filling the throne room. And they were no longer alone. Behind them, stretching back into impossible distances, stood more figures. Millions of them. Billions. Every child Zarthak had killed in his 10,000 years of conquest. They all stared at him with eyes that held no hatred, only an infinite sadness. What do you want from me? Zarthok roared, his divine power flaring around him like a storm. Do you seek vengeance? Do you think your ghost chorus can destroy me? I am the cosmic emperor. I am alone, the girl finished. You're alone. You made yourself alone. You had to, because if you let anyone close, you might care about them. And if you cared, you might lose them. And if you lost them, you might feel that pain again. The singing grew louder, and with it came more memories. Not just his own now, but theirs. He saw through the eyes of every child he had killed, felt their fear, their confusion, their desperate wish for one more day, one more hug, one more bedtime story. But more than that, he felt their hope. Even in their final moments, they had hoped. Hoped that their parents would remember them. Hoped that their deaths would mean something. Hoped that somewhere in the vast universe, love was stronger than death. Why? Zarthak asked, his voice barely a whisper now. Why show me this? Why torture me with what cannot be changed? Because you still can be, the girl said. You forgot who you were. But forgetting doesn't erase the truth. You were a father who loved his children. That love didn't die when they did. You just buried it under so much pain and power that you couldn't feel it anymore. The throne room was dissolving now, reality itself coming apart at the seams. The ghostly children were no longer ghostly. They stood as solid as any living being, their song reshaping the fundamental forces of existence. Zarthak's advisors fled, their forms unable to withstand the transformation taking place. It's too late, Zarthak said, falling to his knees. His divine form was cracking, light spilling from the fractures. I've killed too many, destroyed too much. There's no redemption for what I've become. I'm deed. Redemption isn't the point, the girl said. kneeling beside him. Despite everything, despite being one of his victims, she placed a small, warm hand on one of his massive claws. The point is remembering. The point is choosing to be more than your pain. The song reached a crescendo, and Zarthak's defenses finally shattered completely. 10,000 years of suppressed grief crashed over him like a tsunami. He wept for his own children, whose names he could finally remember: Lyria, Veltor, little Zeeks who had loved to catch fireflies in the evening. He wept for every child he had killed in his quest to never feel such loss again. He wept for the being he had been and the monster he had become. The children's forms were fading now, their purpose fulfilled, but the conductor girl remained a moment longer. "We forgive you," she said simply. "Not because you deserve it, but because that's what love does. It remembers. It hopes. It sings even in the darkness." "What am I supposed to do now?" Zarthak asked, his voice broken. "How do I live with what I've done?" "The same way we died," she replied, her form becoming translucent. "With hope, with love, with song. Be what you couldn't be for us. Be what someone should have been for your children." She faded away, leaving only the echo of music in the air. Zarthak remained kneeling in his throne room. But he was no longer the cosmic emperor. The divine power that had sustained him for millennia was gone, burned away by the light of remembrance. He was just himself again, older, scarred, carrying the weight of unforgivable sins, but he was no longer alone. The song remained, woven into the fabric of space itself. Wherever humans had died, their music lived on, a frequency of hope that would ripple through the cosmos forever. And in that music, Zarthak heard a promise that love was stronger than death, that hope could survive any darkness, that even the most lost soul could find its way home. He rose slowly, his form now merely mortal, merely flesh and memory and choice. His empire would crumble without his power to sustain it. His armies would scatter. The conquered worlds would break free. Everything he had built on a foundation of fear and pain would fall. But something new would grow in its place, something built on the truth he had spent 10,000 years trying to forget, that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't strength or technology or divine might. It was a child's song in the darkness, refusing to be silenced. It was the word they had given him, the gift wrapped in their forgiveness. Remember. The collapse of the infinite throne sent shockwaves through 17 galaxies. On a million worlds, beings who had lived in terror for generations felt the chains of oppression suddenly vanish. The cosmic emperor's legions, held together only by his divine will, scattered like leaves before a hurricane. Some fled to the darkest corners of space. Others simply stood down, confused and purposeless without their god-king's commands. But Zarthak saw none of this. He walked through the corridors of his world ship, no longer a god, no longer an emperor, just a broken being carrying the weight of 10,000 years. His former subjects fled at his approach, unable to recognize the diminished figure as their once terrible master. He didn't stop them. He had no words that could undo the fear he had cultivated for so long. The world ship's intelligence, bound to him for millennia, spoke in a voice tinged with confusion. "Master, your power fades. Systems are failing. The dark matter cores respond only to divine authority. Without it, this vessel will die." "Let it die," Zarthak replied quietly. "It was built on graves. Let it become one." He made his way to the deepest levels of the ship, to chambers that hadn't been opened since its construction. Here, in the forgotten depths, he found what he was looking for. A small, simple vessel. Not a warship, not a throne carrier, just a transport. The kind of ship a father might use to take his children to see new stars. As he prepared the vessel for launch, alarms echoed through the world ship. His former generals were fighting among themselves, each trying to claim pieces of his shattered empire. The conquered species were rising up, overthrowing their overseers. The ordered tyranny he had built was devouring itself. "Where will you go?" the ship's intelligence asked. "You are mortal now, vulnerable. Your enemies number in the trillions. They will hunt you." "I know." Zarthak said, running his claws over the transport's simple controls, so different from the reality-bending interfaces of his throne. But there's something I need to do first. He launched the transport just as the world ship's cores began their death spiral. Behind him, the vessel that had been his home for millennia imploded, taking with it the last symbols of his empire. He didn't look back. There was nothing there worth saving. His destination was an empty region of space, unremarkable except for the debris field that had once been New Eden, the human colony where 5,731 children had died singing. He brought the transport to a stop among the floating remnants and stepped out into the void, protected only by a basic environmental suit. The song was still there, woven into the fabric of space itself. Stronger here, where it had begun. He could hear it clearly now, not just with his ears but with every atom of his being. And as he listened, he began to understand what the humans had known, what they had tried to tell the universe with their final act. Death was not the end of song. Fear was not stronger than hope. And love, real love, the kind that made parents die for their children and children sing in the face of annihilation, that love could not be killed by any force in existence. Zarthak knelt among the debris of New Eden and began to sing. Not the human song. He didn't have the right to that. Instead, he sang the lullaby he had once sung to his own children, the one the ghost girl had reminded him of. His voice, no longer enhanced by divine power, cracked and broke. But he sang anyway, adding his imperfect notes to the eternal chorus. As he sang, he began to gather the debris. Small pieces at first. A child's toy. A broken musical instrument. Fragments of the shelter walls. He had destroyed with the power of a god. Now, with only his mortal hands, he would build. Days passed. Weeks. His former generals sent assassins, but when they found him, they saw only a broken old being building monuments to the dead. Some killed him anyway. But death, he discovered, was not what it once was. The children's song had changed the rules. Each time he fell, he rose again, called back by the music that would not let him escape into oblivion. "You don't get to die," the conductor girl's voice whispered in the stellar winds. "Not yet. You have work to do." So he continued. Stone by stone, memory by memory, he built. Not monuments to himself, but to them. To every child whose life he had cut short. He carved their names when he knew them, their stories when he could find them. When other beings came to the empty systems where humans had lived, they found these monuments floating in space, each one singing with the voices of the lost. Years passed. The survivors of his empire had expected him to try to reclaim his power, to raise new armies, to return in terrible glory. Instead, they found him wandering from dead system to dead system, building his memorials, protected by nothing but the song that surrounded him like a shield. Some came to kill him, others came to watch. A few, a very few, came to help. The first was a Vrex engineer whose own children had been saved when Zarthak's empire fell. She said nothing, simply picked up tools and began to help him build. Then came others, former soldiers seeking redemption, parents who had lost children, children who had lost parents. They worked in silence at first, united only by grief and the need to create something from destruction. But eventually, they began to talk, to share stories, to sing. The monuments grew larger, more elaborate. What had begun as simple markers became soaring structures that caught starlight and transformed it into music. Artists came, adding their visions to the work. Musicians came, weaving new harmonies into the eternal song. Scientists came, studying the impossible physics of music that existed in vacuum. And children came, orphans of the wars, lost and alone. They were drawn by the song, by the strange peace that surrounded these monuments to the dead. Zarthak, who had once killed children without thought, now found himself surrounded by them. They weren't afraid of him. The song had shown them what he truly was, not a monster, but a father who had forgotten how to love. He told them stories, not grand tales of conquest, but simple stories. Stories his own children had loved. Stories the human children might have enjoyed, had they lived to hear them. The children listened with wide eyes, and sometimes they shared their own stories. Stories of survival, of hope, of dreams that refused to die even in the darkest times. One day, a century after the fall of his empire, Zarthok was working on a monument in the system where Earth had been. He had saved this one for last, the human homeworld, the first to fall. As he carved another name into the crystalline structure, he heard a sound that made him stop. Laughter. Children's laughter. He turned to see a group of young beings playing among the construction equipment. They were from a dozen different species, but they played together as if such differences meant nothing. One of them, a small Aurelian girl with butterfly wings, had found a piece of metal and was using it as a makeshift drum. The others were dancing to her beat, their laughter bright as newborn stars. "Careful," he called out, his voice gentle. "There are sharp edges." The girl with the drum looked up at him with eyes that held no fear. "Will you tell us a story, grandfather?" Grandfather. The word hit him like a physical blow. He had been the cosmic emperor, the devourer of worlds, the end of all things. Now, to these children, he was just grandfather, the old being who told stories and built pretty monuments that sang. "What kind of story would you like?" he asked, sitting down among them. "A happy one," a young Thrax boy said, "with heroes and music and nobody dies at the end." Zarthok smiled, an expression his face had forgotten how to make until recently. "I think I know just the one. It's about children who were so brave. Their song changed the universe." As he began the story, more children gathered. They always did, drawn by something they couldn't name. The monument continued to grow around them, its crystalline structures capturing the light of distant stars and transforming it into visible music. And at its heart, barely visible unless you knew where to look, were 5,731 names, each one a promise that they would not be forgotten. The years turned to decades, the decades to centuries. The monuments became pilgrimage sites, places where beings came to remember, to mourn, to hope. The children who had first called him grandfather grew up and had children of their own, but they never stopped coming back. They brought their young ones to hear the stories, to add their voices to the song. Zarthok aged as mortals age, each year leaving its mark on his form. His claws grew dull, his eyes dimmed, his voice became barely a whisper. But he continued to build, continued to remember, continued to hope. The universe had forgiven him, but more importantly, he had learned to forgive himself. Not to forget, never to forget, but to transform his guilt into something useful, something healing. On the 1000th anniversary of humanity's extinction, beings from across the known galaxies gathered at the Earth Monument. Millions came, their ships forming halos around the vast structure. They came to sing, to remember a species that had died, but whose spirit had refused to be extinguished. Zarthok stood at the center of the monument, surrounded by children. His body was failing now, mortality finally claiming what divinity had preserved for so long. But his eyes were clear as he looked out at the multitude gathered in humanity's honor. "I stood here once as a conqueror," he said, his voice carried across space by technologies the humans had never lived to see. "I ended their species in fear and hatred. But they gave me a gift I didn't deserve. They gave me remembrance. They showed me that what we are is not defined by our power, but by our choices, by our ability to hope when hope seems impossible, by our capacity to love even those who wrong us, by our determination to sing even as the darkness closes in." He paused, his ancient lungs struggling with the effort of speech. "The humans are gone. I carry the guilt of that truth every day. But their song lives on, in the monuments we build, in the stories we tell, in the children who play where once there was only death. They are gone. But what they taught us will outlive the stars themselves." The gathered multitudes began to sing, not just the human song now, but a harmony made up of thousands of species, millions of voices, all united in remembrance of the small, fragile species that had changed everything with their final act of defiance. As the song swelled, Exarthak felt a familiar presence. The conductor girl stood beside him, no longer a ghost but a memory given form by the collective will of those who remembered. She smiled at him, the same fierce smile she had worn while conducting her final symphony. "Ready?" she asked. He looked around at the children surrounding him. His children now, in every way that mattered. They would continue the work. They would remember. They would hope. They would sing. "Yes," he said simply. He closed his eyes and let the song carry him away. His body dissolved into light, into music, into the fabric of space itself. He became part of the eternal symphony, another voice in the chorus that would sing until the last star died. The monuments stood as testaments to both humanity's end and their triumph. They had lost the war but won something greater. They had transformed their executioner into their greatest advocate. They had made love stronger than death, hope mightier than despair, and music more eternal than any empire. The children continued to sing as stars were born and died around them. New voices joined as old ones faded, but the song never stopped. It rippled outward from every point where humanity had touched the universe, a frequency of pure hope that rewrote the fundamental laws of existence. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between notes, those who listened carefully could hear it still. That single word that had started it all. The word that had broken a god and healed a broken father. The word that had made the impossible possible. Remember. The universe remembered. And in remembering, it became something better than it had been. The humans were gone, but they had won the only victory that truly mattered. They had taught the cosmos how to love,